Hi. Today I wanted to share a strategy with you that I just learned. I'm really excited about it. It's a strategy to really help set students up to be able to identify the central message or theme or moral or lesson at the end of a piece of literature. If you think about the Common Core ELA standards, specifically Standard 2, where students are being asked to retell key details and at the end really be able to prove their understanding by synthesizing all of those details into a central message or a lesson that we've learned from the author. I'm thinking specifically about the first grade standard where they're really asked to come up with the central message, and as all the Common Core standards do then, they move on in second and third, and by fourth grade that they've moved from central message to lesson to moral, and then in fourth grade they're really asked to find the theme, which is oftentimes very abstract for students and difficult for them to come up with. So I wanted to spend a couple minutes modeling this for you. I just learned about it. Maggie Roberts from Teachers College at Columbia University is the one who taught it to me. I'm sure that collectively they have come to this strategy, and I just think it's such a practical way to set our students up to be able to do that standard successfully, and really you can do it with so many different pieces of literature. I wanted to give the example today with the book Blackout, which is by John Rocco, and it's just a really great example of high quality literature that's been written recently. As you can see, it's got a Caldecott, beautiful illustrations. It's about a family that lives in the city in an apartment building, which is reflective of the lifestyle many of our students live across the country, and I really love the story. It's very simple. It's set out a bit like a graphic novel, and there's some speech bubbles, but for the most part it's very simple text. But the strategy we're going to use today in order to find the central message of this book is actually that we're just going to track a specific object in the story. So it comes up in the illustrations, and actually it doesn't even show up in the language of the book. So the text itself does not say anything about the object, but I'm going to notice the object and point it out to you on the first page where it shows up, talk about what I see, and then I'll show you how you can kind of track that object throughout the story so that by the end of it, you and your students, this would be a first grade example, but really any grade level, could come to a place where that object then translates into a message that the author is trying to teach us. So as I said, Blackout is about the power going out in the city for a family that lives in an apartment. And I'm just going to talk through some of the pages for the sake of time here. I won't read the whole book. I hope that you get a chance to read it yourself. It's really just one of those that you should purchase too for your classroom. It's an excellent example of really great literature. So the story starts out explaining kind of the setting of being in the city, and that it was loud and that it was hot. And it goes on to explain that this family is very busy, and you can see in the different windows they're doing different things. And this is where our object comes in. The boy, instead of being busy like his family is seeking out an object. Here it's difficult to see what it is, but we see here that it's a board game that he's pulled off the shelf. And then in the rest of the story, he takes it to his sister, who's on the phone, clearly not interested in playing it with him, and then takes it downstairs. His dad is too busy, mom is too busy, and you'll notice that everything they're doing has to do with electricity and power. As the story goes on, he is now by himself. He doesn't have the board game anymore. So if we were tracking this with students, I would say, oh, I noticed the board game is gone. He doesn't have it. Instead, he ends up playing a video game. And then here's the climax of the story. The lights go out. All of them go out in the city. And as the story progresses, we see that there's a bit of panic, and the family not really knowing what to do, trying to keep themselves busy with a flashlight. They do some shadow puppeting. They're in their kitchen playing together. And then on this next page is the next time I see that board game. And I would point it out to students, and I would say, oh, I remember the first time we saw it. The boy had it by himself, and he was inviting others to play, and was everyone interested? No one was interested, and now the board game is here, and what do you notice? And I would take quite a bit of time to talk through this with my students, that I notice that the board game is now in the middle of the table, and the family's gathered around it. Now in this moment, they don't actually decide to play the board game. Instead, they get distracted by some noises upstairs, and they head to the top of their building, where they discover that actually they can see lights, real lights, starlight. And they notice that many of their neighbors have found themselves at the top of the building as well. Some community building happening there. They hear some noises down below and head downstairs, out the front door, onto their stoop, as those who live in the city would call it, and many of their neighbors have gathered on the street. And they're finding ways to spend the evening without power as well. Remember, we're looking for that game, and I haven't seen it again, but I'm starting to see that this family is coming together here. And then the lights actually do go back on, and everyone kind of goes back to what they were doing, but the boy gets an idea, and he clicks those lights back off, and here we see the family gathered around the table again. And hopefully at this point, even first grade students would be able to pick up on that object that we've been tracking is back here at the bottom. That board game is around the middle, and this is how the family has chosen to spend their time. She's hanging up the phone, Mom's got the game out, they lit a candle again, and the dad says, "Good idea, buddy." And you can see that the family's brought back together. So this is the point where I would stop and ask the question to students, why do you think the author put the board game in? What does the board game represent and teach us, really? What is the author trying to teach us with this story? And if we track it, that the game represents people being together, an invitation that the boy gave for his family to play with him, and then later on, something to do together when they had nothing else to do, and now at the end of the story, actually it's something to do together that they're choosing to put everything else aside and spend time together. And so with my students, then I can assert that the central message of this book is togetherness, and that the author wants us to learn that lesson that spending time together as family can be fun, and we should do it, and oftentimes that means putting down those other distractions within our home. This family happened to learn that lesson in a blackout when the power went out, but it would be an interesting conversation to have with students. So you can see how just tracking that one object throughout the story made it possible for us to see and do that work of Standard 2, really focusing in on the key details, just one object. Now you can imagine if you have students that are older than first grade, they're really working more on the lesson and the moral and even the theme. I'm thinking of other chapter books along the way that could be used. Tale of Despereaux. If you read that story, the red thread around his neck represents something, and it stays with Despereaux throughout the story. And actually there are many parallels from that story to the novel, The Scarlet Letter, if that's something that your students are at that level trying to accomplish, gleaning theme. I think of other books like The Sweet Smell of Roses, which is a historical fiction book about the March on Washington and two little girls that join that march. There's a color that floats throughout that book. It begins on the ribbon of a bear, and then a little stuffed bear, and then it transfers actually to the stripes of the American flag. And that red ribbon, that transfer, it means something. It's intentional. Authors and illustrators work together to convey a message through the whole story. And if we can teach our students that actually the illustrations and objects that are named, if it is a book without illustrations, those oftentimes lend to and lead us to the central message. So instead of it being this very ambiguous thing that is hard to grasp, we can give students that tool and model that for them. Obviously, younger readers are going to need a lot of modeling. They're going to need to do that with you in an interactive read-aloud type setting, and then hopefully they begin to pick up on it on their own. And that may even be a question that you pose to them in literature circles or in class discussions. What objects have you picked up on in your story that you believe can lead you to the central message? I hope that you see how simple this is and that you try it out with a favorite picture book or even with Blackout or one of the others that I mentioned. It's very simple, but it's also very straightforward and very easy to do with students and to get them started so that their independence as readers grows and that work of Standard 2 suddenly becomes a lot more accessible to them. So good luck and enjoy teaching.